Welcome everybody. We'll just give a minute while everyone gets in and gets settled. Stuart's everybody in and everyone's settled?
To my knowledge.
All right. We'll kick off because we have an hour. Thanks everyone for joining us on a Friday. I'm Andrew Kirsch. As many of you know, I spent a decade of my life as an intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. I've since left, although I always get teased, once a spy, always a spy. Although I did write a book about my experience called I Was Never Here. And so I'm out, and they don't like me very much back at the old organization, and we can talk about that. But, I had a positive experience. I'm proud of where I worked. I think they do important work at CSIS, and I think it's important that people know more about it. And that is to our benefit as a country. It was tough knocking on doors and asking people for help and having no one have any idea what CSIS is and what it does. And when the only times you hear about CSIS in the news is when something has gone wrong, I think that's a skewed view of what the organization does and how it is. And so I've tried to be public and talk about my experience, but I'm just one person. And the unique thing about CSIS is everybody's got a different story. Everybody has a different experience. No two career paths are the same. My book's about my life and my path, and it doesn't make generalizations much. And so I think it's important. I want to invite a former colleague of mine, a good friend of mine, a current colleague of mine, Cationa Macintosh, to share her story, and in a very informal way. And I'm going to ask questions as well, questions that I've received over the time and the years that I think people will find interesting to hear someone else's perspective on it. As I said, you'd be tired of hearing from me and would benefit from someone else's perspective, because as I said, everyone's got a different story. So with that brief intro, Cationa, I will turn it over to you to introduce yourself and say how you came to the organization, the circumstances around you running away and joining the circus, as I like to call it, and then we can kind of have some questions. And I would like to invite, we have people who submit some questions in advance. I have some questions, but if anybody has questions as they come up, please pop them in the chat. We'll have some time at the end, or certainly throughout, that I will try to address them with Trina. So Trina, I'll turn over to you, and please let us, because I know some parts, but I would like to hear all of it.
All the nitty gritty. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining, and I'm happy to be here. Please do ask questions, because there could be things that we're not covering that you would love to know more about. Obviously, you have to put the caveat. Everything we're saying is unclassified. Yes. There may be questions that you have that we're unable to answer. It's just the nature of the business, unfortunately, and we do apologize in advance if some of the answers are a bit more vague than you would like. That's just the nature of the beast. So
and I would jump in and say that we are not CSIS HR or CSIS PR.
No. Yeah.
As I said, we both left and have no formal affiliation with the organization. So a lot of people ask me, like, how do I get in and what can I do? And I send you my CV, and I said, I'm happy to provide whatever advice, guidance, and suggestions I can from my experience, which is now, 2006 to 2016, which is a little dated, but also I have no powers and we have no influence. In fact, as I said, if you mention me and it helps, great. If you think it won't help, don't mention me. I take no offense. So sorry, with that additional caveat, because I think it's a helpful caveat, Cationa, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure. Okay. So my name is Cationa Macintosh, as Andrew said, and I joined the service officially. My first day where I swore in, pledged my allegiance to Queen and Country, was August 2nd, 2002. And I shudder to think how old, if even alive, some of you may have been on that day. So I was young, though. I was just 23 when I joined, and it was my first real job outside of, service jobs that I had through university and stuff. So how did I get to that point in August 2nd, 2002? Well, prior to that, I had been studying at the University of Edinburgh, completing my master's degree in international and European politics. Now, I should say you do not need a master's degree to get into CSIS. You do need an undergraduate degree of some kind. Mine happened to be in history and international relations, but they hire people of all different academic backgrounds. I worked with people with finance degrees, English degrees, kinesiology degrees. They need people with a wide variety of skill sets and a wide variety of interests, because you don't want a monolith of thousands of people who all studied the same thing and have the same viewpoint. So if you're studying and you're doing a Bachelor of Fine Arts, that's okay. Don't think, oh, I can't work at CSIS because I don't have international relations, or I'm not studying criminology or whatever. Well, I was in Edinburgh, as I said, and I thought, what am I going to do with this degree? And I wasn't sure if I was going to move back to Canada. I'm a dual citizen. My parents are Scottish. But I thought, well, I'll probably go home for a bit and I should probably find a job. And I thought, what can I do with this degree? And the CSIS that I knew very little about popped into my head. And so I sent them an email, not knowing what the process was. And it was just basically like, dear Mr. and Mrs. Thesis, I am doing this master's degree. Can I come work for you? And they wrote back fairly quickly, actually, to my surprise. And not to my surprise now, because of how slow often government bureaucracy works. Saying, yeah, when you're back in the country, you don't have to have finished your master's degree at that point. They're like, because you already have an undergrad degree. So as soon as you're back, submit a formal application. Here's how you apply. I was like, great. So I had come back that summer to do my dissertation. And while I was writing my dissertation, I applied for CSIS, and once I had finished up my writing. And that was like days before night. Like the timing could not have been awful and good for me. It was like right at 9/11 that I applied, which was a horrible event. It's still shocking to this day. However, CSIS got a massive budget to hire a whole bunch of new, young, raring to go spies. And I was one of them. And so my application process, I think, was a little quicker than sometimes it is, depending on when you're applying. Because of 9/11, I got my offer I applied very early September 2001. My offer came in around June 2002, which is really quick. So it's a long, arduous process. Some people I know it took a year and a half. So basically you get your application in and they call you in for a suitability interview. And that's just to make sure, if you've already ticked the boxes on paper, it's to make sure that you're ticking the boxes as a real human person. And then after that, you just go through quite a few. You do lots of role plays and you meet with executives and you do psychological testing. That's a really key component. And you do your background checks. Basically, you have to get a top secret clearance, and the clearance aspect is often what's taking the longest to clear people, and just because there'll be a backlog sometimes. All that being said, August 2nd, 2002, I joined. I did 6 months of French language training. I had some French language ability, but not enough to qualify for the certain level I needed, BBB. And so I did that for 6 months, and then I started my entry training, and that just gives you all the skills you need to be an intelligence officer. It's quite boring at times because it's kind of teaching you about the government and teaching about CSIS and teaching about bureaucracy and the policies and all that kind of stuff that isn't really sexy or interesting sometimes, but it's necessary to know because it's a huge part of your job. And then the first desk I worked was security screening, which at the time I was really bummed about, because a lot of my colleagues and friends were on, counterterrorism desks, counterintelligence desks, and I was in screening new immigrants and refugees coming to Canada. And at first I was just like, oh, I don't get to do the real work. But I did that for 18 months. And as much as at the time I was kind of cheesed about it, it actually gave me a really good entry into CSIS, because like I said, I was young. I was 23. It was my first real job.
Can you talk a little about what the CSIS role in security screening is? I think that's really interesting. I did not do a lot of screening, and so I think that'd be helpful.
So anybody who comes to Canada as a permanent resident applicant or a refugee gets screened in all of our databases. There's an automated screening that happens. They run your name, schools you went to, jobs you had, your contacts through the databases. And if something pings, it gets pushed to an intelligence officer that looks at the file and does further checks. Most of the time, there's absolutely nothing. I remember there was one, this isn't really giving away anything too classified, but there was one, this guy was from somewhere in South America, and he had a club, and it like dinged, and they're like, oh, what is this? And it turned out the translation was the Tall, Dark, and Handsome Club. And so, yeah, so it ended up being absolutely nothing, but we have to check it out if it just like doesn't look right. And then I thought the more interesting for me was the front end screening of refugees, because they often came from obviously really terrible places. And so that was just a bit more meaty in terms of the things I was looking at, rather than screening people just coming from regular places all over the world that just wanted to come to Canada for a better life, like most people do.
Did you do
So I started there.
Well, government screening, or just the because
at that point, no, I didn't do government screening at that point. I did a little bit of it when I came to Toronto region. I can touch on that in a little bit. So I don't want to belabor all this too much. So after that, I got sent to a counterintelligence desk. It was a fairly inactive one, but it was interesting, and it would be a lot more active now because it touched on like places like Ukraine. And so I imagine they're a lot busier now than I was at the time. And so I did that for about a year. And then we went to our investigator training, which is where you train to be investigators. And that was a far more interesting training course than an analytical course that we did. So just to touch on that, it is a dual role when you're an intelligence officer. You do an analytical role and you do an investigative role. Everybody has to do both. It's just part of the job. They want everyone to be more well-rounded and understand more facets of the job. Unlike places like the CIA, where either you're an analyst or you're an investigator, like a case, I can't remember what the terms are at this anymore, a case officer. And so that's where they teach you. You do a ton of role plays. You get in the little CSIS cars and you drive around doing mock interviews. And it's a lot of fun. And mock interviews and role plays can be really awkward because they feel very unnatural. And you're pretending like a 65-year-old tired CSIS guy is a 23-year-old, jihadi or whatever. And it's just like, okay, old guy. And but it's still a lot of fun, and it's certainly better than being behind the desk. Gets you out of the office and doing all that good stuff. And so in March 2006, I was sent to Toronto region. There are, I can't remember how many regions off the top of I can name them all. So you can go to places like Vancouver. So there's BC region, there's Prairie region, which has Calgary, Edmonton. There's one in Saskatchewan, like a tiny little office in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, one person.
Yeah. And Winnipeg, and then obviously there's Toronto region, there's Ottawa region, there's Quebec region that has Montreal, and then is there still an office in Quebec City? I can't remember.
District in Quebec City, yeah.
It might be a little tiny one, yeah. And then Atlantic region, so the Halifax is the main office there, but there's also really small ones in St. John's and Fredericton or Moncton, I can't remember which city. And so I went to Toronto region. Obviously, that's the biggest region in Canada, the biggest city in Canada. And really, really tremendous work available in Toronto region, just because of the sheer size of the city and the diversity of the city. And now even Toronto region has several outposts because the province has grown so exponentially. There's now a Southwest Ontario region that's now based out of Hamilton. So that covers London, Kitchener, Niagara, all that places down there, because there's a huge population base and a lot of academia down there. And so academic research is a huge hot button issue right now. Academic research security is a huge hot button issue right now. So my first test I started working on to get introduced into doing interviews was government screening. So I went up to Borden a bunch. I talked to soldiers that needed to get new clearances, and it just gets you comfortable talking to strangers and knocking on doors saying, hey, Andrew Kirsch used to live next door. Do you remember him? Was there any problems, anything sketchy? And so it was a really easy way to start doing that field work. That's a bit uncomfortable.
It's a captive audience when you have someone has to be there to get the clearance versus the person who can slam their door in their face.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And so from there, I went to the Hezbollah desk for 3.5 years. I can't get into too much about exactly what I was investigating beyond Hezbollah broadly. It's a listed terror entity, so I'm not giving away any secrets saying that I worked it. Everyone knows that it's a listed terror entity. I can't speak to what kind of investigation there is presently. I thoroughly enjoyed working in the Lebanese community. It was a lot of fun, really great people. And from there, I went to the RCMP. I was seconded to the RCMP for a little less than a year at INSET. So that's up at Steeles in the 404. There's a lot of national security cooperation. And so I was a CSIS representative with the RCMP. So basically, I looked at the different case files and liaised between the two agencies when there was crossover on investigations. And on that note, CSIS, how it works legally, if there's a counterterrorism or counterintelligence or any kind of investigation that gets to a point that we feel that there is evidentiary reason that it could get prosecuted, CSIS does the intelligence portion, but when it gets to a certain threshold that it's like, okay, this could go to court, like the Toronto 18, if any of you recall that from around 2005, 2006, CSIS started that investigation and then eventually handed it over to RCMP, who could take it to an evidentiary standard so it could go to prosecution, which it did, and quite a few people went to jail. So I was up there and I was the liaison between the two, and it was also co-located with OPP PATS, which is the Provincial Anti-Terrorism Section, I think is the S in it. They're a great bunch too. They do a ton of far-right extremist type stuff. The OPP has a really great handle on that stuff. And that was a lot of fun working with them as well. And then after that, I went on maternity leave for a year. And then when I came back, I was on the North Africa desk. And I was on the North Africa desk until I left the service. And so that's looking at all the country, like primarily I focused on Egypt and also both Sudans, Morocco a bit, Tunisia, Mali, all those places up there. And that was a really great investigation. It showed me an aspect into Sunni Islamic extremism, because if you know anything about different countries, Hezbollah is Shia, and so this got me into Sunni. So, and that it is different and very different investigations, very different cultures, very different. So that was super interesting. It was right after when I came in, the Libyan revolution was strong, so I did a bunch of stuff with Libyans. That was really exciting. And then also Mubarak had been ousted, it was being ousted in Egypt. So there was a lot to talk to the communities about, because not everything's about counterterrorism as well, I should say. When you're working a desk like the Egyptian file, you're not just looking for terrorists. If something huge happens, like the revolution in Egypt, you're talking to that community to be like, hey, is everything okay with you? Are you getting threats from the government? Are you getting, you know, you want to make sure that any conflict that's happening over there isn't spilling into the communities over here, because there's going to be people that support regimes and the people that are against it, and they often bring those conflicts to Canada. And we just want to make sure that while everyone's allowed to protest lawfully, they don't bring those conflicts to a place that's unlawful in Canada through intimidation, stuff like that. So that's where that's like the long-winded, but yet really short span of my career in CSIS. I really enjoyed it. My favorite was recruiting and handling human sources. Thoroughly enjoyed that. I love knocking on doors. I do miss that part of the job. I mean, there's so much more that's available in the service that I didn't get to touch on. Andrew had a different experience than me. We worked together a little bit, but ultimately you can go overseas with the service. You can stay completely in Canada for your whole career if you want to. You can go between different regions if you want to. At the time we were there, it was very difficult to have a lot of say in where you went and how you went, but maybe we can get into that. I don't know I don't want to get ahead of myself, but so yeah, that's where I am. I don't know if you have any questions. Well, where we are right now. I saw one got in the chat there, but.
And I have one question for you. What did you tell people? So you run away, you sign up, you're 23, you say, I'm going to go. It's 9/11 has just happened.
Yeah.
And then you're hired like shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
What did you tell people you did when you signed up and joined? Did you have a story that you told people?
No, I mean, not really. I back then, I think they're a lot more chill about it now. But back then, they was like, oh, don't tell your neighbors, don't tell anybody you're working at CSIS. I mean, obviously, my family knew.
Yeah.
I can't lie to my parents. To this day, they're amazed I was hired. I'm like, thanks a lot. And but I didn't have a very great story. Like, to be fair, when I moved to Ottawa, I didn't know anybody. And so all of my friends became all the people I worked with. So it is a very insular organization because you can't talk about your work a lot of the time. So you do end up being friends with people in the service. I mean, Andrew and I went to Andrew's wedding. And like my ex-husband was in the service, because it's easier to be friends with, to date people in the service, because then at least you can be open about your job in a way that you can't if someone that you're close with is outside the service. So I didn't have, like, if someone on the street asked me, where do you work? Or like if I was crossing the border, I'd just say Public Safety Canada, stuff like that. But luckily it didn't come up a lot.
To your
But I
friends,
think,
it was, yeah, just work for the government and
well, my
change the
friends from
sentiment.
university and stuff, I told them because some of them were
Yeah,
my
I see.
references, so they knew, and obviously not didn't tell them any nitty gritty. But towards the end of when I was going out, when I was an investigator, especially, I was knocking on doors telling some pretty unsavory people exactly where I worked. So I'm like, if I can tell this person where I work, why can't I tell the really nice
It,
lady next door to me?
it's the strangest thing in the world when
Yeah,
you are more honest with the people who you are
yeah,
investigating and are
yeah,
tangentially involved in threat-related activities, and you go home to the people you've known your whole life, and you can't tell them, or you don't tell them what you do.
yeah,
And I agree that it is a strange existence in that case. But everyone has a different level of comfort about where, what you want to share with people and
yeah.
what you don't.
Yeah, it
There's,
feels really
there's
weird having it on my LinkedIn. Like,
Yes. I still feel a bit
but
of a knot in the stomach when I introduce myself and say I used to work for
yeah,
CSIS. There's a question in chat about if
sure.
people at all kind of ages and stages can join. And so
Hmm.
I joined in 2006. I'm the post 9/11 still bubble, the mouse through the snake of a large hiring group that went through. And my class was very diverse in terms of ages. I was a second career, it's 27. I've been in finance and left. There was a couple of gentlemen from the military who had done 20-year military careers, retired from the military and
Yeah.
joined. What was your class like as far as
Yeah.
IOs coming in, and what was the dynamic that you had, especially like right at that time?
Yeah. So when I joined my class, for the most part, I'd say a good chunk of us were young, and it was like our first real gig. But then there were people that it was same as you, that it was their second career. I think the oldest person in our class was probably in his mid 30s.
Yeah.
And he had been, doing other things, and I can't remember specifically what jobs. So I can remember there was at least a few. There was a pilot, an ex-pilot in our class. And she was probably in her early 30s. So there was anything from people like me who were babies that had just got out of university, all the way up to people that had already had careers and were married and had families and kids and stuff like
And
that
and
were
they're
in,
looking for that diverse range of
yeah,
backgrounds, because I think it's helpful in terms of cultural backgrounds
yeah,
and age and experience. One of the things that there was the Toronto police recently said they're going to do away, or might do away with, the degree requirement
hmm,
from hiring. And CSIS has a degree requirement. It's just one of those things that they make you have to have a degree. They don't care
yeah,
what degree it's in. And I don't agree with it. I think that people can accumulate same skills and experience that can demonstrate the same competencies they would get from a university degree through a 20-year career in the military, through if they had left university and gone and taken a job in corporate security, and or not, or somewhere else. And so unfortunately, the degree requirement is still there for those who are in the chat, but they are looking for diverse backgrounds. And one of the questions they asked me at least, was, how are you going to go out and knock on a door and interact, be comfortable in a community that is not your own, right? Like, how can you prove or demonstrate to CSIS, the HR person, that if we send you out, that you are comfortable doing that? Because that is the big part of the job. And
yeah,
I have to imagine, you told where you work, that you were not knocking on doors with people who are from the same background as you.
no,
So one of the things on the interviews and things they talk about, you need to be able to say from your, hey, I lived in London, I lived abroad, so I can say, I've made friends in communities that I didn't know anybody. I had to go and make new friends. It was essentially recruiting. How did
hmm,
you find the experience of going out, young person? This isn't in my list that I cleared with you before, but you're young, you're
yeah,
knocking on doors, communities that
yeah.
are different backgrounds. How'd you find that? How was that experience for you?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I'm so glad that I started in headquarters, because I can't even imagine doing the investigative work when I was 23. I don't think it would have been good. I don't think I would have been as successful, because at the time, everyone had to start in headquarters, and then go to the region. But shortly thereafter, there was the infamous Class 40, that they were the first direct to region class. And
Yes.
so you would go straight from entry training straight into the region. And I'm so glad personally that that didn't happen to me, because I really don't think at that young age I would have been. Other people absolutely might have been. I certainly don't think I would have had the confidence, or just the background knowledge to do that. So yeah, back to your question. I came from a really like farming, like a very white farming town in BC called Chilliwack. Not a lot of diversity. And, you know, obviously I went off to school and there were a lot more diversity that way, but I was working in communities that I had absolutely no prior interaction with or a lot of knowledge of beyond like the news and intellectually reading stuff in my courses at universities. And at first it's kind of intimidating. And then you get to realize, and this is what I really try to impress upon people when I started mentoring new investigators to the regions, is at the end of the day, Andrew's heard this from me a million times. At the end of the day, we're all human beings.
Mhm.
Wherever you're from, you can have the most different background, different experiences. We all as humans have same core feelings, core needs, core wants, core experiences that are varied from different backgrounds. And if you can relate to people on a human level, then you're going to do all right. And you have to retain your humanity and their humanity. As much as the views they may espouse might not sit well with you and they could be completely different to your own.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, they're a human being, just like you're a human being. And so that was the one thing that really helped me when I was an investigator, is just treat them with respect, and they'll sometimes treat you with respect. You can treat someone with all the respect in the world. If they don't want to talk to you, they don't want to talk to you.
At the end of the
trust me,
day,
I've got
we're still
plenty
from
of
the
doors
government. Yeah, still there
Yeah.
from the government trying to ask them difficult questions.
Yeah.
I found to add, and I 100% agree, the authenticity. You can't, people pick up on if you're being inauthentic. You know,
Yes.
I'm not, pardon my language, a hard ass. I am not intimidating in any way, not just physically. I'm an average. I would be, if they said generic, draw a generic white guy, you know, preppy, that would be me, and it'd be very generic, and no one would be intimidated by it. And I could not come across and sit across from somebody and try to give the impression that they were, you know, that I was being to be tough, that I was the bad cop, because they would know. And so you have to, I would say, you know, if you think you have to play a role, I don't think you're going to get very far. You have to really lean into, you know, your authentic self and how that will appeal to other people. Hey, I need your help. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm trying to work, I'm trying to keep Canada safe. And if you can help me do that, you know, together we can, you know, we can do that. We'll be a team, look out for you. Not that if you don't do this, you're never traveling again. And you know, that was never my strategy, because I didn't think I could sell it. I wouldn't believe it. We didn't have those kind of powers. And I think people responded much more to authenticity.
Yeah.
As well.
It's,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously this is talk isn't about it. It's just a lesson in recruiting sources.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
but really quick, I will say it's, you have to be authentic, but you also have to be flexible. Mirroring people's body language, how they are. You walk into every interview, you have to read the person that you're speaking with. And because if I would sit across from someone who is a big joker, I'd, you know, okay, I'd be a little more relaxed, Katrina, you know, but if someone's very prim and proper, I'd be prim and proper Katrina. And so you just, but it was still me being me, just well behaved, you know, just not, you know, not me after a couple beers with my friends, you know. So you do have to be authentic, but you also have to be flexible. You can't go into every single scenario the same way because they're all different.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see a question in chat, and I'll talk about there is no average length of a career. So people join it all different times in their life. Remember too, if your recruitment process can be 15 months, you know, it's not a job where you sign up and then 2 weeks later they call you and say you're hired. Can you be here on Monday?
Yeah.
Right. You don't know when you start the recruitment process where you will be in your life in 15 months or 18 months when they call up and finally say, hey, remember that thing you applied to a year and a half ago? Are you still able to show up on Monday? We'd love to have you. So, you know, there's all sorts of time to get in that takes a long time, that people do at different stages. People leave at different stages for different reasons. I like to say that, you know, the job didn't change. I did. I signed out. I was 26 years old. Yeah. Single. They said, you're going to go work in Ottawa in a windowless office and, you know, move to a city we don't know anybody and take French lessons. And we're going to write a lot of memos. And I said, no problem. And then you're going to go lie to everybody you know and be in the field and knock on doors, work late at night. And I said, no problem. And then I got married and had a kid. I was like, you know what? I find the fact that I have to lie to everybody annoying. I know that it's challenging on my wife. I was working very late, and I don't want to go back to Ottawa. And those were always things that did not change in the career. That were when I signed up, I knew the deal, and 10 years later, my relationship to what I was willing to sacrifice for the fun that it is and all of the good things that it brings changed. Other people make the determination at different times, 12 years, 15 years, better opportunities come along. So there is no set time. And I will actually, but what I want to talk about is that the people who are there, we talk about morale, we talk about CSIS in the news. I've read a lot about the people who stay and leave. What have you heard about where it's at? The people are there, the people have left, different reasons for people leaving, why people aren't. Do you have any thoughts?
So
service?
Just to touch on the length of career thing, when I joined in 2002, for the most part, people who were hired there stayed there. That was their career. I mean, that's the people who probably joined in like the 80s, and it was more of a viewpoint that this was your career, you stick with the job. And now I think people, especially younger generations, you go from job to job. It's not that same lifelong commitment in the same way. Because, even when I left, people were like, oh, it's a government pension. Oh my God, you're crazy.
You were one of the first. You were one of
the
first.
I was a trailblazer. I don't want to say it was me, but I think since I left, a lot more people have left because it's really amazing experience and not a lot of people have. It makes you look very good to prospective employers because, you're obviously reliable. You're not a criminal. You've met the most stringent security clearance in the country. Mm-hmm. Where it's at now is a lot more people are leaving. And I just saw a question pop up about salaries. I don't think anybody is shocked to understand that we have a cost of living crisis going on.
Yes.
You are not going to get rich working at CSIS.
No.
It's a government body. I think a level 8 IO makes around a top of their salary 106. I think one of my friends just told me what her salary was, and it's 10 something. Which isn't terrible, but when you're living in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal, it doesn't go very far. It's unfortunate because if you're posted to St. John's, you're making the same amount of money as someone living in Toronto or Vancouver, and the cost of living is vastly different. So I know that is a huge issue for a lot of people in that they're like, well, this has been great experience, but I sure would like, to buy a house. And so maybe I can see if I can make money somewhere else.
And it's a challenge where you work with the same government and making different money if you live in Halifax versus Toronto, and expensive to live there. I saw a great question, and maybe sorry if I could jump in about the different national security. So one of the questions I get a lot is, I'm interested in the career national security. What should I look at? Where is CSIS versus the RCMP versus the Communication Security Establishment?
Yeah.
By the way, fun note on CSE, I was, when I was in headquarters, I had to write we had a case where I was writing some memos to CSE. I had to write some memo to community. At the time it was the CSEC. And I said, okay, well, do we have a template for this memo that I have to write? And then someone gave me a template, and I wrote this memo, and then this case went on, and I've written, many memos. And after a few months, I noticed that I had written the Canadian Security Establishment of Canada as the name of the agency in my header of the memo. And I was like, well, that is not the name of the organization that I have many official government memos written on.
Well, I mean, they change their name all the time.
They ate all these times. But the question about what organizations, and this is important. I tell everybody, if you are interested in career national security, think about what cases you were kind of interested in, right? CSIS has a very specific mandate to investigate threats to security Canada that are 4 threats: terrorism, espionage and sabotage, foreign influenced activities, and subversion. That's not the right order, but 4 cases. If you were interested in money laundering and the financial aspect, there's a part of that at CSIS, but it is not the core part of the mandate. If you were interested in foreign intelligence, we do not have a foreign human intelligence service, but we have a foreign signals intelligence service, CSE, Communication Security Establishment, I think it's called. Canadian security establishment, I'm not sure, but they would do SIGINT, Canada's NSA abroad. So if you really want to get into kind of abroad and SIGINT and technical, that would be CSE. CBSA has a different mandate. CSE, the RCMP, bringing charges, so I kind of asked two questions. One is, what specifically in national security interests you? And I would say, if you are reading an article on your lunch break, what is the subject you're reading about? And try to make that, what organization deals with that, right? And number two is, how do you want to spend your day, right? And when we talk about, and you're an analyst and you want to read reports, you want to write reports, you want to be safe at your desk, you want to work 8 to 5, and or do you want to go knock on doors and talk to people and recruit and go to Tim Hortons and have lots of coffee? How do you want to spend your day? And going to Tim Hortons is a lot of fun, knocking doors, but it's stressful. And reading reports can be tough, but you know what? You know what your day looks like, and you get to see a little bit more than people knock on doors. So yeah, just advice for the people interested in a career, different careers, where in national security they might fit in. Because you said you worked with the RCMP. Sure, you worked with other organizations.
Yeah, so the RCMP, though, to be fair, at ONSET, this could have changed. Again, this is dated information from like 14 years ago when I was there. Just because if you join the RCMP, there's no guarantee you're going to work in their intelligence division. And even if you do, that's usually a temporary position. I don't think anybody at that time, there were no lifers in ONSET.
Yes.
Usually that was one of your many posts within the RCMP. So if you became an RCMP officer, that's certainly something that you could do as part of your career. And if you made that clear with your superiors and that's the career trajectory you wanted, I don't really know how their career trajectories necessarily work there. But I can say at the time that I was there, they were there for a posting for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then they went to another part of the RCMP. So that was the same with the OPP in their provincial anti-terrorism section. But yeah, there's all kinds of different, the military has its own intelligence division. And if you're really, technically minded, CSC might be more for you. They need huge linguistics capabilities, obviously, because they're, intercepting foreign communications in all languages all around the world. So they need a ton of people that speak a ton of different languages. That being said, so does CSIS.
Yes.
And that changes, because you can say, oh, wow, amazing. I work. And here's the thing about CSIS is they don't often do things logically. You would think, oh, this person, they speak fluent, I don't know.
Russian.
Yeah, Russian. They'll be on the Russia desk. No. Oh, they speak Turkish. They'll be on, the PK. No. It's just they put people where they put people. Sometimes it suits their languages and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes if you're from a particular community that we're investigating, like the Russian program,
yes,
it might not serve you as a Russian national or Russian Canadian or someone who speaks Russian in Canada to be on that desk necessarily. Because sometimes these communities, these immigrant communities are very insular, very tight knit, and they'll be like, I know your mom, or something like that. And you really don't want people to figure out who you are.
It is a added challenge if you are from a community that, where they're leveraging your language skills to work in that community for many, many reasons. And maybe that's, I'll see if someone will come on and talk about that experience. I don't have this isn't a podcast, but it's, I think it's a super different perspective than I had. Obviously. So
well, we do have our communication analysts that are like the interpreters. They're office based. It's not often that they go out on the field. So if you do have a specific language capability and you're not interested in being an intelligence officer, there are jobs where you can sit at a desk, listen to the technical intercepts we get through warrants, and use your language skills that way as well.
And that was another, we were intelligence officers. There are tactical and strategic analysts that are subject matter experts in their field. So if you have a specific area of interest, as Cationa said, you may not get that if you sign up and say, I'm an IO and put me wherever you want to put me. But if they say, we are hiring for someone with these language skills, you have a good idea of what the desks are and what those, and that's also where advanced degrees in those subjects and language skills will serve you well, and something else to look for. So let me ask you this question. If looking back, you're starting out, we're just saying, what would you wish you had known then that you know now about your career that, because there's no information. One of the reasons we do these talks and wrote a book is because there's no information about what a career at CSIS is like. So what is something that you would have told your former self? And if don't do it is just as legitimate an answer as any other.
No. I would never say, to me, don't do it. Some people I would say don't do it if it's not for them. But for me, I think I think you touched on it earlier. The way it works there is the lot of the opportunities that sound really exciting that you might want to do, foreign postings to dangerous places, they don't come up until you have a certain level of experience. And by the time you have that certain level of experience, you have a child, and you may not want to leave your child to go to Afghanistan for 6 months. I know I certainly didn't want to, and I certainly didn't want my ex-husband leaving me alone with a baby for 6 months, working full time. And so I wish I had known that, because and I will say this a little bit, this may have changed during the recruitment process. They said like, oh yeah, like you can go here and you can go here. They don't tell you the fine print that it's like, oh yeah, but not like wait 10 years, then maybe. And so by the time those opportunities come up, a lot of the time it's when you're at a point in your life that you're not interested in leaving your family to go to a really dangerous place, or taking your family, uprooting them. And if you do get a foreign posting in CSIS, because while we don't collect foreign intelligence, there are foreign postings. It's a lot of liaison, that sort of thing. You have to go back to Ottawa after that posting. And I didn't really want to ever go back to Ottawa. So that was part of the reason. Things have changed. There were forced transfers when we were there. That's now changed. If you want to stay in Toronto for the entirety of career, it can limit your career progression because it's harder to climb through management that way. Like if you want to be like top dog at CSIS, well, then you got to be willing to live in Ottawa, because that's just the only way that it's done. But if you're happy, the salary I quoted was for a level 8. So that's like a non-manager role. If you want to be a desk head, that's a level 9. They make a little bit more. Then it goes deputy chief, deputy director general. If you want to get to be director general level, you have to be willing to move around. Yeah. So there is, at least now, there's not forced transfers in the same way that there was when I was there, but it does limit your career a little bit. So I have no interest in becoming like a director general. So that's obviously because I left, but yeah.
It's a great point about foreign travel, that you have, if you sign up, you may have these visions of James Bond and international cases. And the most exotic place I ever made it to was Windsor.
Exactly.
Which is lovely, and to the lovely people of Windsor, I had a wonderful time at your casino, staying there many nights. But yeah, not the glamorous foreign postings, and those do have caveats of you got to come home afterwards, and some of them you can't take your families to.
Yeah, but I would say though, in the big regions like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, the work is so fascinating. You don't need to go overseas to see some really, really interesting work. So that was sort of my view when I was in Toronto region, is like, why would I leave A, the most diverse city in the world, and B, really interesting work? So you don't have to go overseas to see good stuff. But if you're in somewhere like New Brunswick, yeah, you're not necessarily going to get the same, view and opportunities as you would at a bigger region.
Absolutely. No, that's great. I get my so CSIS has been the news, and I'll let you cherry pick because whenever I do public speaking, every time I talk, I'm like, depending on the day is when CSIS popped back in the news. It was spy balloons, then it was foreign interference and the leaks, right? Yeah. And the leaks were happening, and foreign interference. Before that, there was the convoy, and how the director said that CSIS did not meet. He did not feel like the threat rose to the level of a threat under the CSIS Act, but they still found it a threat. And most recently is the assassination. I think we're calling it an assassination, where the Prime Minister said that India had a hand in assassinating a Canadian on Canadian soil, which I think would fit for the definition of foreign interference.
Absolutely.
How do any one of those jump out as an area of work, something that you looked at and went, oh my, this happening in the news, I don't feel like it happened when we were there. And so it's
not this much. CSIS was definitely not.
Any one of those that really kind of went, whoa.
Yeah, I think Justin Trudeau coming out and saying that India had a hand in the assassination, which I believe they probably did. Modi's Modi. Like, he- I think things have changed. So when we were there, for me, it was very counterterrorism focused. So we weren't in the news in the same way. If it was because like we the Toronto 18 or the Via Rail plot, stuff like that. And so it's like, oh man, so this foreign interference, like it certainly was happening then, but I don't think it was happening to the extent that it is happening now. And so I think that it's, that is such a sensitive topic that I don't know the ins and outs about to say, do I think the government's handling it properly? I don't know because I'm not there. I'm not part of it. But it is weird to see CSIS in the news so much, and it's weird to see leaks. And I don't know who they're coming from. I'm assuming from a high level because I think it would be insane for a working level IO to do a leak like that. Like that's just suicide basically. But if you're in the C-suite, I would assume they're coming from a high level. But I don't know for sure. That was a non-answer, but
No, I'm not saying you have to know the person. I don't know who it is, but it seems like people is much more comfortable talking to the media.
Yeah. No one would have dreamed of it in the early 2000s. No way.
No.
Oh, suicide.
I find that, and then I find that we're being forced to have these conversations about PRC, PRC interference in our elections based on newspaper articles, and they were saying that the reason that the prime minister came out and said that India was involved is because they were going to post an article about it. Yeah, that kind of forced his hand, and so we have this kind of this chatter leading to the government playing a little bit of catch up. I find is kind of wild to watch.
Yeah.
From the outside, do you know? This may be an unfair question. How people on the inside are feeling about all this stuff? Like, are they just feeling whiplash of what's happening?
I think their biggest issue is they feel completely understaffed for one. So I know they have all of these existential threats and these really serious threats that are it's a lot more difficult to navigate counterintelligence, foreign interference than it is a counterterrorism investigation.
Yes, that's a great point. You want to talk about why that's tougher? Because CT is a little more straightforward. You're right.
Yeah. So with CT, you're dealing with, I don't know, regular people, like crappy people, but like regular people.
CT's counterterrorism. So the bombs bombs going on, counterterrorism, terrorist activities. We were during our time, it was like the homegrown threats, Toronto 18, foreign fighters, or people who wanted to, go join ISIS. Was kind of the CT nexus. But and
then foreign interference, you're dealing with sophisticated government entities with funding, obviously counterterrorism doesn't have. And you're like, these are highly trained, highly skilled people who are meshed into the fabric of their own government. And then they're also using regular citizens to collect intelligence for them. And then recruiting sources in that space is so difficult because if you want to have a well-placed source within the Chinese government in Canada, in the diplomats, these people are risking their lives in a way that counterterrorism sources just aren't. Like it's so delicate, and it really is that classic espionage that is a dance, and it's sort of like a mutual understanding, like, we're spying on you, we know we're spying on you, I know, but let's not really talk about it. We still have to shake hands at on at a dinner in Ottawa, but at the same time it's so sensitive and it's so dangerous, and if those sources get exposed, they're dead and their families are dead. And it's just it's scary. Like that's scary stuff. As much as terrorism is terrifying and people die, it's just a very different level of sophistication, and the threats totally different. And hard to explain to people too, when they're just like, when Russia interfered with the US election, where people don't understand how it's happening, but it is, and they don't get it, and it's more existential, and it's more intellectual, where it's like, bomb goes off, people die, that's bad. But why is it bad that this is happening? And I don't understand how they're doing it. So it's a lot more to get your head around, I think.
Yeah, I know. I 100% agree. I think that it's funny. Like, it's the level of sophistication of the threat of the CT versus the CI that kind of leads to the training of the people that you're trying to investigate.
Yeah.
Have received the same, if not equal, if not better training than we've received.
Yeah,
The
100%.
intelligence officers, and then the gray area of, is that person a formally recruited source, or are they an unwitting, I never know if it's unwitting or unwilling supporter, a participant,
Yeah.
in what is a larger exercise. I think it's a very challenged and nuanced investigation. So knocking on doors, and my experience was that no one has ever heard of CSIS. And maybe it's fun to tell a fun story. I always tell that no one had ever heard of the organization. Any fun stories? I don't want to make a dour note, but I tell you, I don't think I've said this one before on a podcast, or on a WebEx, but I remember I knocked on the door. I was trying to track down somebody in an investigation, and we're trying to find people with access to threat-related information and who are willing to talk to us. Right? It's the dual, because someone might have great information and not wanting to talk to you, and there's people who would love to talk to you but have no good information to share. Right? And I was trying to track down a guy who we thought had a relationship with Al Qaeda. He was a supporter, possibly. He had contacts. We didn't quite know the relationship, and I found his ex-wife. And I thought, this is great. She's going to know if this guy, if he's into, Al Qaeda or not, or his contacts there, and she'll be willing to talk to me, his ex-wife, right? So I go and I knock on the door and I say, hello, my name is Andrew. I'm here from CSIS, and I have some of your time. I'd like to talk to you about a national security investigation. She said, of course, come on in. Happy to help. Please, whatever I can do, sit down. She sat down, and I sat down, and the ex-husband sat down. And I thought, oh, great. What are we going to talk about for the next hour in this pretend interview that now I can't tell anything I want to talk about? Do you have any fun experiences, weird experiences? I always say spying is people trying to do their hardest, and weird things happen all the time. And maybe I should have prompted you beforehand, but anything jump out? A fun spy story?
Oh, God. I mean,
I know a few that you're probably saying, can I tell this or not tell us? Some people that
you know why you met one. There was I had a source with a foot fetish, so that was fun. Great guy. I don't think that's breaching like any kind of confidentiality.
There's lots of people with foot fetishes, so I don't think that narrows it down.
I don't know. I think for me, a lot of the communities that I worked in, they knew what CSIS was, because in a lot of the height of like counterterrorism in mosques, they would have like the sign that said what to do if CSIS calls. So a lot of people knew who we were right away. I found the people who didn't know who we were like white Canadians. They had no clue. They'd be like, who are you? Yes. And so that would be the time that I had to explain myself a bit more. I got like physically removed from someone's home once. Like the man who was not supposed to touch women touched me, pushed me out the door. So that was, at the time scary. In retrospect, I was like, oh, whatever. But you just meet characters. I think my biggest thing is like I got to meet people that under any circumstance in my life I would never have gotten to meet. And for better or for worse. And just the stories that I learned, the nonchalant way this one guy told me about all the people he killed in the Lebanese civil war in the 80s. I was just like, oh yeah, me too. Like, well, super nice guy, but it's, it was the Lebanese civil war, and like, and so it was just, and you're doing this in Tim Hortons, and that's what always amused me, is like, we're sitting down in a Tim Hortons talking about bloodshed and civil strife and political unrest of whatever stripe, whatever, country I was focusing on that day. And meanwhile, there's just families around drinking their coffee. Meanwhile, like, you're talking about really, really awful stuff in the most mundane of settings. That's always kind of amused me. Once I interviewed, so we have people that will talk to people at the airport when they come to Canada sometime. I had an interview referred to me, this person from NIL, he's like, oh, I talked to this guy when he came in, you should go talk to him. That's all I knew. I'm like, okay. So I like set up an interview at Tim Hortons, and the guy shows up, and he is on, I don't even know what drugs, and not mentally well. And I'm sitting there trying to like placate him and be like, okay, yeah, thinking, oh my God, I've got to make sure he doesn't get angry, or because this could go really badly.
Sure.
And I went through that interview and I was just like, because he had tried to get me to come meet him like at a private, like at his home. And I was like, no, like, let's meet in a public place. And I am so glad that I had not gone to his home, because he was not like mentally well, and he was not mentally like not high. Like he was, I don't know what he was on, but he was on something. And so that was the only time I felt really, really unsafe, because I was just like, that's not, and I was really angry at the person that was like, oh yeah, I should totally go talk to him. And so
It's
yeah, luckily for the most part though, I never really felt unsafe.
it's a that is a something people found surprising, is we don't carry weapons.
Nope.
The joke is I'll throw my phone at them to run away.
Yeah.
And we're doing individual interviews in Tim Hortons. Maybe if you need some support, you bring someone along. Meeting sources and hotels. It is an absolute. When we talk about the stress of being an investigator, how much fun it is, there's a stress and a challenge to that.
Yeah.
Especially when you're starting out, that can be extremely difficult.
Well, when I was at the RCMP and I would talk about like what we did, that we would go out alone, we went out unarmed, and sometimes we would get in trouble if we wanted to buddy up.
Yes.
And the cops were like, you do what? And it's like, oh yeah, like, because they wouldn't let me go out with them because I wasn't armed. And I was like,
Yes.
I'm doing the same thing as you and I'm never armed. And they were just like, well, you can't come with me. So yeah.
When I was doing special operations, I think I'm allowed to say this. I have a bulletproof vest. Okay. I like, do you think they would ever let me go in a place where they thought there was a chance I would need a bulletproof vest? That part of it really was like, I'm unarmed. So you're going to send me somewhere you think I might need a bulletproof vest, but I'm not going to have a weapon. Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. We weren't quite there. Okay. Last question, because it's 1:00 and we'll do this again. It's a lot of fun. Thank you for doing this. Usually we're talking for an hour. Any advice? So advice time for people interested in a career, who are maybe in the interview process. Like, what do you say? What's your advice?
Be patient with the process, because depending on where they are with their recruitment, it can go super fast or it can go turtle speed slow. Like it can take less than a year and it can take several years. Just depending. Keep your expectations realistic. I think the people who had the worst experience at CSIS were the people that it was their whole dream and they had built it into this image that just wasn't going to ever fulfill like their expectations. And they often were the people that were the most disgruntled and the most disappointed, because as cool as the work is, at times it is slogging government bureaucracy, because it is a government department. If you like paperwork, then you're in business. So
it's a great point.
We're very welcome, Amanda. Anyway, but so yeah, just keep your expectations realistic. Realize that unfortunately, I will say you don't have a ton of control over your career. You don't get to pick the investigations you work on. Once you're there for a bit, you can ask, because they'll have these HR meetings and you can say, I've been doing, CT. I'd really, really like to do CI. Like if there's any way I can get her on counterintelligence desk, that would be great. Usually you don't. So just realize that you actually have very little control over the investigations you work on and your career in general. I think, like, at least now they're not force transferring people. So if you end up being stationed to Vancouver and you absolutely love it there, as long as your dream isn't to become, the highest ranking person in CSIS, you can stay in Vancouver. But there are some really great opportunities. There are postings that you will want to take your family to. You can go to Paris or London. Those are both publicly advertised ones, so I'm not saying anything bad there. So there are really great opportunities, but it is a government job like everything else. So with the cool comes the bureaucrat. So that's about it. But I had a great time. A lot of my friends still work there. I still I feel like I'm still like 1 foot in a lot of the time.
Yeah. And as I said, it's great. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time, Katrina, and everyone for joining. And we'll do it. We'll do it again.
If anyone has any questions, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to DM me.
Yep, that's it. We'll find us. Stay in touch. Kirschgroup.ca and subscribe there so you'll get the emails. And we'll keep them coming. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.